The divorce papers hit the white tablecloth with a slap that echoed louder than the blizzard howling outside the windows of the Obsidian Lodge. My husband, Jareth, didn't even look at me. He was checking his reflection in a soup spoon, smoothing back his hair with that practiced tech bro indifference he wore like armor. Across the table, his parents, Winston and Marjorie, were already sipping their vintage Pinot Noir, acting as if destroying my life was just another course in their 5-star meal. "Sign it, Odette," Jareth said, bored. "We both know you don't fit here. You're obsolete technology." Winston swirled his wine, his eyes fixated on my hands covered in small white scars from years of welding sparks and flux burns. "Yes," he sneered, "those dirty hands of yours are ruining the aesthetic of the founder's dinner. Sign the papers, take the settlement, and disappear, or we blacklist you. You'll be frozen out of society by morning." Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's standing with me in this community. I didn't look at the divorce papers. I looked at the bill the waiter had just placed on the table between us. $18,400. Vintage wines I hadn't touched, truffle-infused appetizers I hadn't ordered, and a private room fee for the privilege of being humiliated. Jareth laughed, a sharp barking sound that made the crystal glasses tremble. "What's the matter, Odette? Can't cover it? I'd offer to pay, but since we're technically separated as of 5 minutes ago, this feels like your debt. Maybe you can go back to the kitchen and weld something to pay it off." Marjorie giggled, covering her mouth with a napkin. "Oh, Jareth, don't be cruel. She can't help that she's destitute. It's not her fault she doesn't belong in a place like the Obsidian Lodge." I didn't cry, I didn't beg, I didn't even blink. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me, the same focus I feel when I lower my welding mask and ignite the torch. The world narrowed down to a single point of heat. I reached into the inside pocket of my heavy canvas work jacket. It was stained with engine grease and soot, a stark contrast to the Italian silk suits surrounding me. Jareth watched me with a smirk, expecting me to pull out a crumpled wad of cash or a maxed-out debit card. Instead, I pulled out the slab. It wasn't plastic. It was a heavy rectangle of raw, unpolished volcanic glass, edged in solid platinum. It was cold to the touch and absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. I dropped it onto the silver payment tray. It didn't make a plastic clack. It made a heavy, dull thud. It sounded like a gavel hitting a judge's bench. "Run it," I said. The waiter, a young man who had been looking at me with pity all night, reached for the tray. His fingers brushed the card and he froze. He looked at the strange matte black surface, then at the platinum edge. His eyes widened. He looked at me, then back at the card, his hands starting to tremble. "Sir," Jareth snapped impatiently. I can't run this here," the waiter whispered. He wasn't looking at Jareth. He was looking at me with absolute terror. He tapped his earpiece. "Code black, table 1, code black." "What is this?" Winston demanded, slamming his hand on the table. "Stop playing games. My son is trying to divorce this woman and we want to leave. Bring the manager." "You don't need to call him," I said, my voice steady. "He's already here." The double doors to the kitchen swung open. Mr. Thorne, the general manager of the Obsidian Lodge, a man who ran this mountain like a military fortress, walked into the private dining room. He was flanked by 2 large security officers. Winston puffed up his chest, preparing to leverage his status. "Thorne, finally. This woman is trying to pass off a fake payment method. I want her removed for fraud." Mr. Thorne didn't even glance at Winston. He walked straight past Jareth, past Marjorie, and stopped directly in front of my chair. He clasped his hands behind his back and bowed. It wasn't a polite nod. It was a deep, deferential bow. "Miss Odette," Mr. Thorne said, his voice cutting through the tension like a laser. "We weren't expecting you this season. The owner's protocol has been activated immediately." The room didn't just go quiet, it froze. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the space.
Jareth frowned, his brow furrowing as he tried to process the words. "Miss Odette? Her name is Odette. And what do you mean, owner?" Mr. Thorne turned slowly to face my husband. His expression was one of utter disdain. "I mean, sir, that this card is the Onyx Key. It belongs to the sole proprietor of the Obsidian Lodge and the entire mountain range it sits on. You are currently dining as a guest of Miss Odette." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. I looked at Jareth, then at his parents. Their faces were pale, their mouths hanging open in a silent scream of confusion. "You wanted to blacklist me from society, Winston?" I asked softly. "You can't blacklist the landlord." I looked at the trembling waiter. "Run it." To understand why the room fell silent, you have to understand the hands that held the card. My hands are not soft. They are not manicured like Marjorie's, nor are they smooth like the hands of the investors Jareth spends his days trying to impress. My hands are rough. The pads of my fingers are permanently calloused, and my knuckles are a mapwork of small, silver scars from molten slag and slipping grinders. For 7 years, I have been a metal sculptor. I take raw, ugly girders of industrial steel, things other people see as debris, and I use fire to bend them into something beautiful. Jareth always hated my work. To him, it was dirty. It was manual labor. It was something to be hidden away when his venture capital friends came over for drinks. But that is the thing about steel. It does not lie. If a weld is weak, it breaks. It does not pretend to be strong while plotting your collapse. People like Jareth, however, are made of vapor. They live in a world of pitch decks, projections, and metrics that exist only on a screen. I watched him stare at the Onyx Key in my hand, his face a mask of confusion, and I thought about how we got here. It didn't happen overnight. Cruelty does not walk through the front door with a loaded gun. It creeps in through the cracks like a cold draft. It is the boiling frog principle. First, it was a joke about my work boots being too clunky for his office party. Then it was a request to scrub the grease from my cuticles before we went to dinner. Then it was the suggestion that I stop talking about my art because it bored the shareholders. I adjusted. I calibrated myself like a machine, thinking I could fix the error in the system. I thought if I just became smaller, quieter, and cleaner, he would look at me the way he used to. I didn't realize that I was slowly cooking myself alive in his disdain. I mistook his control for guidance and his insults for advice. I was so busy trying to keep the structure standing that I didn't notice the foundation was made of rot. But there was one thing I kept hidden even from him. Years ago, long before I met Jareth, I was given a heavy velvet box by the only relative who ever truly understood the nature of strength, Aunt Beatrice. She wasn't a sweet old lady who baked cookies. She was an eccentric industrialist who lived in a converted aircraft hangar and ran a global hospitality empire with an iron fist. She taught me that dignity is the one asset you cannot liquidate. On my 25th birthday, she pressed this card into my hand. She told me it was not for buying luxury cars or designer handbags. She said it was a breaker bar, a tool to be used only when the nuts were rusted shut and the pressure was crushing me. She told me that wealth wasn't about flashing gold, it was about having the leverage to say no. I kept it in my safe, buried under invoices and sketches. I lived off the money I earned with my own sweat. I paid my share of the mortgage. I paid for the groceries. When Jareth's third startup failed and he couldn't make payroll, I was the one who quietly transferred $12,000 into our joint account so he wouldn't lose face. I let him believe he was the provider because I thought love meant protecting his fragile ego. I looked at him now. This man who had called me obsolete. He thought he was discarding a broken wife. He didn't realize he was trying to evict the landlord. He didn't know that the woman he married wasn't just a welder. He didn't know that the name Odette wasn't just a name on a marriage license. It was the name on the deed to the mountain he was standing on. He spent 5 years looking at me, but he never really saw me. And now, under the cold lights of the dining room, I knew the time for restoration was over. It was time to light the torch.
I expected them to apologize. In the silence that followed the revelation, I thought they would scramble to fix the damage, to say they didn't mean it, to claim it was all a misunderstanding. But people like the Hargroves don't apologize when they're caught. They double down. "This is entrapment," Marjorie hissed, her face blotchy with rage. "You lied to us. You sat at our table pretending to be poor, letting us worry about you while you were sitting on a fortune. That is deception, Odette. That is cruel." I stared at her, genuinely baffled. "I pretended to be poor, Marjorie? I wore the same boots for 3 years because Jareth said we needed to save money for his seed rounds. I didn't pretend anything. I just didn't tell you about the safety net because Aunt Beatrice made me promise never to use it unless I was in danger, and tonight you proved I was." Jareth stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He didn't look remorseful, he looked furious. It was a physical intimidation tactic he'd used before, crowding my space to make me feel small. "You can't kick us out," he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "We're partners, remember? California is a community property state. Anything you have, I have. That hotel, this lodge, that card, it's marital property. You just handed me the keys to the kingdom, Odette. Thank you." I looked down at his hand on my arm. Then I looked up at his eyes. For years, I had flinched when he got like this. I had softened my voice and tried to de-escalate. But tonight, I felt nothing but cold contempt. "Take your hand off me," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had the density of lead. He didn't let go. "Or what? You'll call the manager? I'm the husband of the owner. I outrank him." "Mr. Thorne," I said, not breaking eye contact with Jareth. "Yes, Miss Odette." Mr. Thorne stepped forward, 2 security guards mirroring his movement. "Mr. Hargrove seems to be confused about the nature of our ownership structure. Please escort him back to his seat. If he touches me again, have him arrested for assault." The guards didn't hesitate. One of them stepped between us, breaking Jareth's grip with a swift, practiced motion. Jareth stumbled back, looking at the guard, then at me, shock replacing the anger. He wasn't used to people saying no to him. Winston, sensing the shift in power, tried a different tactic. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket, trying to summon the authority of the boardroom. "Now, hold on, let's not be hasty, Odette. Clearly you're emotional, you're not thinking straight. You're a welder, for God's sake. You don't know how to run a hospitality empire. If you try to manage this alone, you'll run it into the ground in a month. You need us. You need Jareth's guidance. If you apologize for this outburst and reinstate Jareth's position, we can discuss a consultancy arrangement. Otherwise, I will petition the court to have you declared mentally incompetent to manage the trust." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Mentally incompetent because I fix things with my hands instead of breaking them with spreadsheets? You think I'm weak because I'm quiet, but you forget something, Winston. I build structures that hold up skyscrapers. You build debt. I turned to Mr. Thorne. "I'm leaving. I have a suite waiting for me at the Summit property." "And us?" Marjorie asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and entitlement. "We'll freeze." I looked at them one last time. The wine was still breathing on the table. The fire was still warm. They were surrounded by luxury they hadn't earned and couldn't afford.
"No," I said, "I'm not kicking you out. Keep pouring the wine, Mr. Thorne. Let them order whatever they want. Let them stay as long as they like." Jareth looked hopeful. "Yes," I said, walking toward the door. "I want you to sit in this beautiful room, drinking my wine, eating my food, and knowing that you are only here because I allow it. I want you to sit in the expensive seats you can't afford and think about the fact that the woman you called trash owns the roof over your head. It's a far worse punishment than the cold." I walked out of the dining room and into the lobby. The heavy timber doors closed behind me, sealing them in their golden cage. I didn't look back. I went to the Odette Trust offices in Denver the next morning. The building was glass and steel, sharp angles cutting into the blue winter sky, the kind of structure I used to admire for its engineering while feeling out of place in its lobby. Today, I walked in like I owned it, because I did. My lawyer, Vivian, was waiting for me. She wasn't the type to offer tea and sympathy. She offered espresso and subpoenas. She had a team of forensic accountants who had been working since 4 a.m., pulling every financial thread attached to the name Hargrove. "You were smart to demand that transparency clause in the prenup," Vivian said, projecting a spreadsheet onto the conference room wall. "It's going to be the autopsy of their lifestyle. Take a look." I stared at the screen. I expected to see wealth. I expected to see investment portfolios, real estate holdings, diversified assets. What I saw was red ink, rivers of it. "Winston is leveraged to the hilt," Vivian explained, tapping a column. "The country club memberships, 3 months overdue. The vacation home in Aspen, second mortgage, high interest. Marjorie's jewelry is mostly leased or insured for triple its value against loans. They've been robbing Peter to pay Paul for a decade." "And Jareth?" I asked, though I think I already knew. "Jareth is worse," Vivian said bluntly. "He's not just broke, he's underwater. He put everything into crypto exchanges that collapsed 6 months ago. He's been covering his losses with high-risk bridge loans." I sat back in the leather chair, the smell of expensive coffee filling the room. It suddenly made sense. The cruelty, the constant need to belittle me, the obsession with my dirty job. They didn't hate me because I was poor. They hated me because my poverty was honest and their wealth was a lie. "It's status anxiety," Vivian said, reading my expression. "They needed you to be small so they could feel big. A person drowning will climb on top of anyone to get a breath of air. You were their flotation device, Odette. You made them feel superior because you didn't play their game. Now that they know you own the stadium, the game is over." "It's not just a game," I said, looking at the numbers. "It's a Ponzi scheme." "Exactly, but that's not the worst part. We found something else, a file hidden in a shell company Jareth set up 2 months ago. You need to see this." She clicked a folder labeled Project Hephaestus. "Hephaestus," I murmured. "He thought he was being clever," Vivian said grimly. "Look at the collateral." The document on the screen was a loan application, a big one, $4.8 million from a private equity firm known for predatory lending, and listed under secured assets wasn't a house or a car, it was my portfolio. "Your intellectual property he listed," Vivian said, her voice tight. "Your sculptures, your designs, your brand trademark. He claimed he had power of attorney over your artistic output. He effectively sold your future work to cover his past mistakes." I felt the blood drain from my face. My art wasn't just a job, it was my soul. It was the hours I spent sweating in the dark, the burns on my arms, the ache in my back. He had taken the one thing that was purely mine and used it to gamble on his own ego.
"He can't do that," I whispered. "He doesn't own my work." "He does if you signed this," Vivian said, pulling up a digital signature cage. I looked at the signature. It was a perfect replica of my own. Too perfect. It was a digital stamp, copied and pasted. "I didn't sign that," I said, my voice turning to ice. "I know," Vivian said. "The timestamp on this document puts you at a gallery opening in Seattle. You were 3 states away." She looked at me, her eyes hard. "This isn't just a divorce anymore, Odette.
This is forgery. This is grand larceny. This is a felony. I looked at the screen at the man I had once loved, reduced to a criminal file. He hadn't just tried to leave me with nothing, he had tried to steal who I was to save himself. "Get the papers ready," I said. "I'm not just countering the divorce, I'm pressing charges." Vivian pulled up the loan documents again, highlighting a section buried deep in the fine print. "This isn't just about debt," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "Look at the default terms. If he misses a payment, which he already has, the lender seizes the collateral immediately. They don't foreclose, they extract." I leaned in. The lender wasn't a bank. It was a private equity firm called Vanguard Holdings. The name sounded sterile, but the terms were predatory. They had the right to auction my intellectual property rights within 48 hours of default. He didn't just borrow money, I realized, the horror setting in. He set me up to be erased. He knew he couldn't pay this back. He was counting on the divorce settlement to cover it. Or he was just going to let them take my life's work and walk away. "It's worse," Vivian said. "The loan was taken out to cover a margin call on his crypto losses. He burned your art to pay for his gambling addiction. And because he forged your signature as a co-guarantor, he made you liable for the entire $4.8 million if the collateral doesn't cover it." I stood up and walked to the window. The city below looked small, manageable, but inside I felt like the walls were closing in. My sculptures weren't just metal, they were my voice. They were the only thing in my life that Jareth hadn't touched, hadn't criticized, hadn't tried to mold into something corporate and shiny. And now he had turned them into a bargaining chip. "He stole my future," I said, my voice trembling with a rage so pure it felt like heat. "He tried to sell my name." "And that," Vivian said, closing the laptop with a snap, "is why we aren't negotiating alimony. We are going for the jugular. This forgery changes everything. It pierces the corporate veil. It voids any claim he has to marital assets because he entered the marriage with fraudulent intent or committed fraud during the union. We can freeze his accounts today. We can seize his passport." "Do it," I said. "Freeze everything. I want him to feel what it's like to be helpless. I want him to know what it's like to have no options." Vivian picked up her phone. "I'll call the district attorney. We're filing criminal charges for forgery and grand larceny. By the time he walks into that mediation room, he won't be a husband looking for a settlement. He'll be a defendant looking at 5 to 10 years. I looked at my hands, the scars, the calluses. They were the proof of my labor, my honesty. Jareth had tried to use them against me, to shame me and then to steal from me. But he had forgotten one thing about metal. You can heat it, you can beat it, you can bend it, but once it cools, it is harder than it was before. He wanted a trophy wife, I said, turning back to Vivian. He's about to find out he married a steel trap. Vivian smiled, a sharp, predatory grin. Let's go to mediation. The mediation took place 3 days later in a conference room that smelled of lemon polish and stale coffee. The holiday decorations were gone, replaced by the grim gray light of a January morning. Jareth sat across from me, flanked by Winston and a lawyer who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. They weren't laughing anymore. The arrogance that had filled the dining room at the Obsidian Lodge was gone, replaced by a twitchy, frantic energy. They were cornered animals, and they knew it, but they still had teeth, or so they thought. "We are arguing that Miss Odette acted in bad faith," Jareth's lawyer began, shuffling papers with trembling hands. "She knowingly concealed significant assets during the marriage. Therefore, we believe the prenuptial agreement is void. Mr. Hargrove is entitled to an equitable share of the marital estate, including the Odette holdings." I sat silently next to Vivian. I didn't need to speak.
I just watched them try to rewrite history one last time." Vivian adjusted her glasses. It was a shark's movement. "That is an interesting theory," she said calmly. "However, the Odette Trust is an irrevocable, generation-skipping instrument established 5 years before the marriage. It is not marital property. Jareth is entitled to 0% of it." Winston slammed his fist on the table. "This is entrapment. She sat at our table, listened to us worry about money, and said nothing. She deceived us." "Deceived?" I spoke for the first time. My voice was low, but it stopped Winston mid-sentence. "You never asked, Winston. You assumed. You looked at my hands, saw work calluses, and assumed I was poor. You looked at my clothes and assumed I was desperate. That isn't deception. That is your own prejudice blinding you." "We want the house," Jareth blurted out, his eyes bloodshot. "The house is in both our names. I want my share of the equity, and I want alimony. I have become accustomed to a certain lifestyle that relied on her support." It was pathetic. The man who had mocked me for being a welder girl was now claiming he needed my money to survive. Vivian pulled a file from her briefcase. "Actually, Jareth, we are glad you brought up the house and the lifestyle." She slid a document across the table. It was the audit report regarding the $4.8 million loan guarantee Jareth had signed. "According to the transparency clause in your post-nuptial agreement, the one Odette insisted on years ago, you were required to disclose all debts and liabilities under penalty of perjury," Vivian said. "You failed to do so. You hid a massive liability attached to a failing crypto venture, and you forged Odette's signature on a refinancing application to cover your margin calls." The color drained from Jareth's face. He looked at the document as if it were a death warrant. "Because you violated the transparency clause," Vivian continued, her voice cutting like a knife, "the penalty is severe. The court is not going to divide this debt. It is entirely yours. Odette is absolved of any responsibility for the loan. Furthermore, because you attempted to defraud her regarding the house, we are filing a motion to remove your name from the deed immediately. You leave with what you brought in, Jareth, which, as of this morning, is a massive amount of debt and a potential criminal indictment for forgery." The room went silent. The weight of the moment crushed down on them. The trap they had set for me had snapped shut on their own legs. Winston stood up, his face purple. He leaned over the table, trying one last time to use his physical presence to intimidate me. "You listen to me," he growled. "You think you can destroy this family? I have friends in this town. I have judges who owe me favors. I will bury you in litigation for the next 10 years. I looked at him. I remembered the way he had laughed on Christmas Eve. I remembered the way he had toasted to my homelessness. "Sit down, Winston." I didn't shout. The authority in my voice was absolute. "You have no friends. You have accomplices, and accomplices turn on each other when the ship starts to sink. As for burying me, I have the resources to fight you until the next century, but I don't think you will last that long. The auditors are coming for your company on Monday. I suggest you save your energy for them." Winston slumped back into his chair, defeated. I stood up and gathered my coat. "Odette," Jareth whispered. He reached out a hand, tears streaming down his face. "Please, don't do this. I made a mistake. I was scared. Dad pressured me. I still love you. We can start over. With your capital and my connections. We could be a power couple. Please, don't leave me with this debt." I looked at my husband one last time. I saw the fear in his eyes. He wasn't grieving the loss of his wife, he was grieving the loss of his safety net.
"You don't love me, Jareth," I said, "and you certainly don't respect me." I leaned in close so he could hear every syllable. "You didn't ask for a divorce because you fell out of love. You asked for a divorce because you thought I was worthless. You tried to throw me away like a broken chair. You only want me now because you realized I am made of gold. But it is too late." "Odette, please," he sobbed. "Good-bye, Jareth," I said. "Try not to spend it all in one place."
I walked out of the conference room. I could hear him crying behind me, a jagged, broken sound. 2 police officers were waiting in the hallway to serve the warrant for forgery. I nodded to them as I passed. I walked out of the conference room and down the long hallway of the courthouse. I could hear Jareth crying behind me, a jagged, broken sound that echoed off the marble floors. 2 police officers were waiting near the exit to serve the warrant for forgery. I nodded to them as I passed, pushing open the heavy double doors and stepping out into the crisp January air. The sun was shining. The sky was a brilliant, piercing blue. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs. I wasn't Odette Hargrove anymore. I wasn't the welder they hid in the corner. I was Odette. I had stripped away the rot, sanded down the rough edges, and revealed the strong, unyielding grain underneath. 6 months later, the snow has melted from the peaks of the Obsidian Lodge, revealing the granite beneath. The resort is under new management, mine. We had our best quarter in a decade. I fired the board members who had enabled Winston's spending habits and replaced them with people who understand that value isn't just a number on a spreadsheet. As for the Hargroves, gravity finally took hold. Winston and Marjorie filed for bankruptcy last month. The country club memberships are gone. The leased jewelry was repossessed. They have been quietly exiled from the social circles they worshipped, proving that their friends didn't like them, they just liked their money. Jareth is currently awaiting trial. He calls me sometimes from a prepaid phone, but I never answer. I blocked the number the day I walked out of mediation. I spend my days in my studio now. I'm working on a new series of sculptures, large, imposing structures made of reclaimed iron and volcanic glass. I don't hide my hands anymore. I don't cover the scars. But true power isn't just about destroying your enemies. That's just demolition. True power is construction. That is why I launched the Iron and Grit Foundation this morning. It is a $50 million grant program designed specifically for artists, tradespeople, and laborers who have been marginalized by elitist gatekeepers. I am using the Odette fortune to fund the people the Hargroves of the world look down on. This is the justice of the welder. I realized that revenge is a finite resource. It burns hot and fast like magnesium. But building a legacy lasts forever. I am not just holding the door open for people like me. I am welding it open so it can never be shut again. Jareth and his parents thought I was dirt. They treated me like something to be wiped off their shoes. They forgot that dirt is the only thing that matters. Dirt is where you bury the bodies of the past, and dirt is where you plant the seeds of the future. I am done burying. It is time to grow. If you believe that character is worth more than a bank account, hit that like button and share this story. Let's remind the world that you should never judge a book or a welder by their cover.